Is Melissa Thierry. I'm the Associate Director of University Life here at the Arlington campus. Pizza and Perspectives is one of University Life's signature events with a history spanning more than 10 years. The idea is to bring students, faculty, alumni, and the greater Arlington community together in meaningful dialogue on relevant topics. We would serve pizza and refreshments while engaging together, but in this time of pandemic, we've shifted to an online platform. The dialogue is still meaningful and relevant, and although we can't serve pizza, we hope you join us from home. We'll still feel a sense of community in this virtual space. We're using Zoom webinar for tonight's discussion. So the panelists will engage in discussion for approximately 45 minutes, and then we welcome questions from the audience via the Q&A chat box located at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you have a question, please type it in the box for our panelists to answer. So I'd like to introduce our panel. Before us right now is Terry McAuliffe, and Tom Davis. Governor McAuliffe is the 72nd governor of Virginia and a distinguished visiting professor for the George Mason University Schar School of Policy and Government. Thank you, Governor, for joining us on this panel.
You bet.
We also welcome Tom Davis. Mr. Davis served in the U.S. House of Representatives, representing Northern Virginia's 11th District, and is the former chair of the National Republican Congressional Committee. Thank you, Mr. Davis, for joining us tonight. Our moderator this evening is Dr. Mark Rozell, Dean, Schar School of Policy and Government, and holds the Ruth and John T. Hazel Chair Public Policy here at George Mason University. Thank you so much, Dean Rozell, for joining us tonight and moderating this event.
Thank you.
So the floor is yours, Dean Rozell. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Melissa. Delighted to do this. And what can I say after last night? I think tonight's event will probably be a little bit more civil than what happened last night. No, it'll be a lot more civil, I am sure. But that was something else. And I was rather excited when you invited us to do this program the evening after the presidential debate. I was expecting an analysis of what happened and why, but something else happened last night. I'm not sure you'd call it a debate. It was unlike anything I've ever seen. And I really want to just jump right into it with former Governor McAuliffe and former Member of Congress Tom Davis to talk about really what happened last night and how do we go forward from here with the debates, and pose the question that some have provocatively posed, which is, should we even do more debates this year after last night's debacle? So Governor McAuliffe, could I pitch it to you first?
Sure. Dorothy? I got my kids yelling in the back there. First, I would say, yes, there are going to be 2 more presidential debates. Of course there are. Of course, Joe Biden's going to do the debates. Of course, you have to do it. I think the Presidential Commission, they met today and determined they're going to change some of the format, like turning the mic off. I mean, it was not a debate last night. It was unfortunate. This is the real opportunity for millions of Americans to listen to both sides. And, you know, Trump kept interrupting constantly through the entire night, throwing insults. And I think it hurt Trump badly. Trump went into this debate with a majority of Americans disliking him. His goal would be to get people to like him. He's the underdog. We're winning in all 6 battleground states. And he ended up the night with more people disliking him than when he actually went into the debate. So for Trump, he just couldn't control himself. Biden did what he needed to do. He looked at the camera several times, talked to the American people, talked about COVID, talked about voting and the things that needed to be done in our country. So, you know, even Chris Christie, who's a buddy of mine and who's the governor of New Jersey, was the debate in charge of Trump's debate, came out today and said way too hot, didn't do what he needed to do. Pennsylvania Senator Republican Rick Santorum said it was a horrible night. And the worst night for me and for many people, of course, was when he would not condemn the white supremacists and sort of embrace the Proud Boys. And, you know, I dealt with Trump there in Charlottesville. I talked to him on the phone that day. He refused to condemn him after I begged him on the phone to do it. It's just who Trump is.
Thank you, Terry. Tom,
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I think the debate last night was emblematic of what's happened in American politics, basically, and that is the increase in partisanship, the increase in polarization, the increase of incivility. I think Joe Biden wasn't the most civil either, Terry. He certainly took the bait and got into the mud fight as they were going through. And if you look back 8 years ago when Biden was running for vice president, in his vice presidential debate against Paul Ryan, watch how often Biden interrupted him. Biden at that point he interrupted Ryan on everything, and the news media came off and said, oh, he'd wiped out Ryan in the debate. And Trump does the same thing, and the media jumps the other way. Now, I'm not apologizing. I think the debate was it was terrible for America. It was kind of an all-time low. But if you look at the ratings on it, Telemundo did a post thing on Twitter. It had Trump up 2-1 among Hispanics that answered their Twitter poll. Undecideds didn't seem to move much, at least in what I looked at the, afterwards as they were going through some of the focus groups and the like. But I think all of us in America just kind of threw up our hands and said, is this the best that we can do? I don't think Trump is a racist. I think he's got a lot of other issues on there. And if you listen carefully, I think it's like many things he says, subject to interpretation. Democrats are always willing to go ahead and put their spin on it so that they can use their identity politics. But having said that, Terry, Trump is behind. Unlike 4 years ago, where he carried all these states by narrow margins, right now he is behind in these states, but many of them are still margin of error. So the race is not put away with 5 or 6 weeks to go. Trump did not do what he needed to do last night, though. I remember going through my first debate and feeling I'd wiped the floor with my opponent, and I walked off, and my campaign chairman looks at me and says, Tom, let me ask you a question. Do you want the voters out there to like the speech, or do you want them to like the speaker? And I thought of him and said, well, I want them to like the speaker. He said, well, you might have won on the speech, but you sure weren't very likable. And Terry, to your point, I think Trump didn't come off last night as a very warm, likable guy. I think Biden, to some extent, sunk below, could have maintained a little bit higher profile. So to some extent, they were both taken down. But Trump was the one who needed to come out of this a winner, and he blew that opportunity last night. He'll have a couple other chances. There are still some intervening facets in this campaign that could change the dynamic. We've been surprised all year with black swans that have come out of nowhere. But at this point, Biden comes out of this ahead, but not so safely ahead they can declare victory. And this will be a function, I think, of turnout and then where these independent voters go. I just say one other thing. This is a very diverse country. We look at things, we are in groupings at this point. People don't tune into the news to get information. They tune in to get affirmation, to get their worldviews validated. And as you follow all of the diverse media sources today, I think most of us in the university might tend to read the Washington Post, but you read some, I always look at the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, who are both excellent papers, excellent piece of journalism for different perspectives on this. You get the same with Fox and MSNBC. I think it's still a very, very closely divided country, and Trump is losing this just basically because of the force of his own personality and not being likable. That's reversible, but he blew an opportunity last night, I think, to change that dynamic.
Thank you. So a lot of the academic literature suggests that these debates, looking back over the course of modern history from 76 to the present, right, when we regularized the use of presidential debates every 4 years, don't make a big difference. Are these overrated events ultimately more theater than they are really substance, or more show than something that really turns voters one way or the other?
Well, they're very valuable because I think, first of all, you have independent voters who, about 90% of Americans today are in their corners. They've already made up their mind. There's a very small sliver out there who have not made up their mind. And I think they do want to watch the debates to make that final decision. So I think they're very important. We have 3 of them. We'll have the vice presidential debate next week. But, the problem that Trump had is, yeah, we're ahead in 6 battleground states. We're up pretty healthy in Michigan and Wisconsin today. We've moved up substantially in Pennsylvania. If those hold, it's over. But today, Biden is up in Florida by 3 or 4. He's up in North Carolina by 3 or 4. And, Arizona, we're up. Today, we're up in a Fox poll, 5 in Ohio, and it's not even a state that's really been contested. So what Trump needed to do last night was to change that dynamic. So that debate would have been very important for Trump because the trajectory is on our side. And he missed that opportunity. And the biggest challenge he had was to try suburban women. and those remaining independents who have yet to make up their mind. And they were repulsed last night. I mean, all the major polls came out today that Biden had won it, but that's not the issue. The issue is that constituency that he needed, he offended. And it's hard to get him back because we will not have the same amount of people watching the next one and the third one. This was probably the height as it was in 2016, and then it will go down dramatically. So they're important. It was a big opportunity. I think it will drive turnout. I can just tell you, I got the Virginia numbers last night. In Virginia, as of last night, 1.1 million Virginians have voted, early vote in person. Compare that to 2016, when 538,000 voted in the entire 2016 campaign. So here we are, 101% above where we were in 16. We still have 34 days to go to vote. And from what we've seen in our analysis, about 70% of those early votes are Biden voters. So last night, Trump had to do something to upset the apple cart and change that dynamic. And he didn't. I think he actually hurt himself. But we're always going to have debates. I think they're very, very important.
Yeah, Mark, look, even in races where I wasn't seriously contested, I'd always debate my opponent, sometimes 5, 6, 10 times. Jim Moran, my Democratic friend next door, did the same thing. I just think it's an important part of holding public office that you ought to put yourself up. I don't think either candidate are particularly good debaters, but it helps the public flesh out, get a measure of people when they're under fire and asking questions that they try to avoid on the campaign trail. So I think they're here to stay. And I think the public will basically punish people who bow out of debates at this point. I know it's many incumbents in other races will not debate if they think they're far ahead because they don't want to make a mistake or give their opponent exposure. But I think in presidential debates, they're still very important. I think they're here to stay. We've got 2 more to go. If you remember, Terry, Barack Obama in his first debate with Romney had a bad debate. You remember that?
Most incumbent presidents do.
Yeah, and so he recouped on the next 2. So, there's still time. And the polls, I've seen several Florida polls show Trump ahead, same thing, but he's got to carry Florida. I mean, like you say, it boils down to Wisconsin, Minnesota, well, I'd say Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. He's got to carry one of those. In fact, he's got to probably, Pennsylvania is the most likely, given its demographics and what we've seen in movement of registration at this point. It's easier at this point for the Biden people to block a Trump victory than vice versa. But, he drew an inside straight last time. And don't underestimate the enthusiasm for Trump that we don't see on the university campus and we don't see in Fairfax County. This will be, I think, a very high turnout election. The midterms 2 years ago were the highest midterm turnouts in 102 years. So I think it's a huge turnout, but it's a very, very diverse country.
Yeah, let me pick up on a point there, Tom, because the polling data that I have seen, that the Washington Post, ABC have done, and others on the intensity factor plays to Trump's advantage significantly. The numbers are actually quite striking. How much Trump has an advantage in terms of the intensity of support that he has. So for questions such as likelihood to vote, are you very likely, somewhat likely, and so on, the Trump people are kind of off the charts there, that they're going to vote no matter what. And yet some observers kind of dismiss the importance of that kind of question about intensity and tend to just look at the, how the 2 candidates stack up. Who do you intend to vote for? Is there a concern there?
Let me pick up on that. Let me pick up on that. Trump has taken some. I know Bill Stepien very well, who was Christie's guy in New Jersey. He's the campaign manager. He's taken money off TV to put it on the ground in states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, where they have same-day voter registration. If you take a look at Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania, in those states, of the non-voters in 2016, non-college whites outnumbered by almost 2-to-1 college whites and minorities combined. Now, that's not predictor of how all these people will vote, but when you look at the demographic coalitions the parties have put together, it looks more like Trump voters are there's more of a Trump motherlode in these areas if they can identify them and get them out. And oftentimes these don't show in polls. The hardest part in polling, as you know, is predicting who will show up. And with all the absentee voting and everything going on, that's very difficult. The polling doesn't predict with precision, who's going to show up. So I think in those particular states, Trump is going to tend to underpoll and overperform, given the makeup of the traditional non-voters that they're spending a lot of time getting out. That's my gut. We'll wait and see.
Harry, what do you think?
Yeah, I would make argument Minnesota's off the table. I mean, about a month ago, people were talking about it. I think Biden has moved up. I think Trump has pulled all his media out of Minnesota. We're down to a basket of states: Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Florida, Arizona. Now, Ohio's been added. As I say, it was not a state we were originally looking at. The most recent polls have come out, have Biden up 5, dead even in Georgia, 1 down in Texas. Now, I'm not saying we're playing there. I'm a big believer you go for 270 electoral votes.
Yeah.
But you talk about intensity, and I would just disagree a little bit, Mark. I mean, what happened in 16, for a lot of different things, Comey coming out 12 days before and all the other issues around it, 95 million Americans did not vote in the 2016 election. 95 million. The next day they woke up and said, holy cow, how did this possibly happen? And since that point, you have seen dramatic turnout in Virginia, the first test in 17, as well as in New Jersey. You saw it in 18. We win the House. We net 7 new governors. We pick up 8 state chambers. We do it again in Virginia in 19 when we win both chambers. And then 20, our turnout in the primary was up 60% this year, almost statistically impossible. My point being, it's not only Virginia, it's all over the country. And in those early battleground states, I mentioned 800,000 new voter registrations that we've been able to get. There is huge intensity of people voting. That was indicative in 18 when you saw it all over the country. So I think there's not an intensity question. The issue is going to be, as you've seen around the country in early voters, make sure everybody can get that vote in and be counted.
Mark, let me give a different perspective if I can on that. I think voting was up significantly in the Virginia Democratic primary because the Republicans didn't have a primary. And so you have some independents and some Republicans who want to play. They want to stop Bernie Sanders. They wanted to do other things. I think that swells the Democratic numbers. I mean, to be sure, I think the Democratic ranks have been swollen in Virginia, and we saw this in the midterms. Midterm elections also are not indicative of what's going to happen in the following 2 years in the presidential race. Barack Obama had 2 of the worst midterm elections you can imagine. 2010 was the worst Democratic midyear since 1938. And then 2014 was even worse if you measure it by final results. And yet he was able to win re-election in 2012. And the reason for that is that independent voters used midterms to put a check on the president rather than giving them a blank check. Some of them come back the next time, and the intensity is usually with the out party. Terry, I think in terms of Georgia and Texas, Democrats had everything, and Florida, they had everything going their way in the midterms and couldn't deliver that. Democrats spend their money there and are constantly disappointed. I think that's likely to happen this year, but Trump certainly hasn't put those states away. I feel the most comfortable about Texas, just in terms of how it goes, and should not make the mistake Hillary did when she started spending money in Georgia and these other states. And you figure now, if she put that into a couple other states, it might have been different. So I think their better strategy is to go to 270 because it's a lot easier to block the president from 270 electoral votes than to go for the kill at 300 or something.
And the only other thing, Mark, your viewers should understand, in those 3 battleground states that we lost by 77,000 votes, 325,000 people voted for the third party candidate, all Democratic votes, which were taken out of our side, which we don't have this time.
Well, I'm not sure that Gary Johnson's votes were all out.
Well, most of them were Bill Stein. That's what
the Stein votes clearly, I think, were like 5 to 1.
the Green Party had most of them.
Yeah.
You still have that in a handful of states. You do have you still have third parties on the left, but for the most part, they're not playing the role they did last time.
Nothing in 16. I mean, they tried to get Kanye West. He is on the ballot in Michigan and Wisconsin. I don't think it matters. He tried to get on here in Virginia. He had fraudulent ballots, and we were able to get him knocked off.
Let me
You didn't want Kanye running?
I'll leave it alone.
Well, since you mentioned Virginia, and I'll just look. I have to do this, even though everybody's putting Virginia in the blue column this year. But just to put it in perspective, there was a poll by the Wasson Center at Christopher Newport University that has the race at only 5 points. Jill Biden was in Virginia campaigning, meeting with some of the leadership of the Democrats of the state legislature. And I've noticed that Biden has been on TV running ads in the DC market, which I can't imagine is intended for Maryland or the District of Columbia. So what's going on in Virginia? Why is there activity here when everybody's talking about Virginia being in the bag for the Democrats?
Well, we're not one of the core battleground states. Those are the 6 that I mentioned earlier. If you then do the next ring, Virginia clearly is in that category. You know, most of the polling data has us up 10 to 12. I think that's too high. We won with Hillary by 5 percentage points, over 200,000 votes in 2016. If I'm predicting here tonight, which I like to do, and Mark, you and Tom can remember that fireside chat we had outdoors there, and I predicted the number of House seats to the dime. Perfect for you, I remind you of that. I would predict, you know, a 9-point win here, probably in Virginia. But, you know, here's the difference for us this year that we've never had before. We have more money than Trump has. I mean, we brought in $363 million in the month of August. I mean, I have never in all my years, and I've been raising money for a long time. So the resources to the point that we have never seen before. So we have the opportunity to increase the basket that we didn't do in 2016. We have 3 times more money than we had in the 2016 presidential election. That allows you to buy TV in more states. But let me say this, you don't take anything for granted. We have 100 staffers on the ground here in Virginia. Doug Emhoff will be here tomorrow. He and I are campaigning all day tomorrow around the state, who is Kamala Harris's husband. So, you know, you got to have a presence, you got to play. I don't think you'll probably see the principals. If you do, then the numbers will have tightened up a little bit. They should be better spent, like, you know, Biden in Pennsylvania and Ohio today. But, you know, I mean, we're ahead. And I think in a presidential turnout year, Virginia is a blue state. It gets more challenging for Democrats in the off year.
Mark, let me talk about the money. I mean, I think Republicans have been outspent in every major race in Virginia, except for the McDonald race. You know, going back to 2008, when down the stretch, Obama had a 3-to-1 spending advantage over McCain. Part of that is the reason McCain took the matching funds and was limited in what he could spend, and Obama did not. Secondly, is that McCain had to suck it all up in the primaries, which went on a little bit longer. But in Virginia, I think the biggest problem for Republicans is solving their suburban problem up here in Northern Virginia and the Richmond suburbs and the like. I don't know that these suburbs have gone permanently Democrat. They're certainly dating the Democrats pretty steadily, but I don't think they're married. I think the problem for Democrats come when they have to govern and start making policy choices between their inner city demands and their suburban demands. You get into taxes and crime and some of these issues. I think the suburbs will come back into play, but President Trump has done very little to bring them into play. He's done very little to appeal to your higher income, higher educated suburban areas. He had an opportunity to do that, but that's not who he has played to at this point. So I think the margins up here will be huge. Last time Trump got 29% in Fairfax. I don't think he'll reach that this time. Arlington, he was 16% last time. He might do a percentage point better there. I don't know, but he's got the opportunity to improve was there. And I just don't think the way they've run the campaign or the administration has closed the gap and done what he was capable of doing as an incumbent. And I think that puts Virginia probably out of reach. I think they will overperform in some of these rural areas. These areas tend to continue to get more conservative, but that's not where the growth in the state is.
So let's turn to some of the voting groups. One of the surprises in some of the latest polls is Trump's performance with Latino voters right now. To what do you attribute that? He did better by, I think, 8 percentage points with Latino voters in 2016 than did Mitt Romney 4 years earlier. There was supposed to be, many analysts had projected, a Latino surge, which didn't happen. Latino vote was down by about 3 percentage points from 12 to 16. What's going on here? How do we explain?
Well, Latinos are culturally a very conservative group. When you they're very patriotic. You take a look at volunteers in the military. You take a look at the flag waving, religious. They fit all of those components of the basic Republican electorate at this point. And Trump is getting his share. I mean, the only thing that hurts us there is the immigration issue, which hurts among some groups, but it's not hurting in Florida among Cubans. Puerto Ricans don't have that same issue because they're already American citizens. You take a look at Nicaraguans, Venezuelans, some of these other people that have come from communist areas, and it's no surprise that Democrats play this identity politics game that Republicans are against minorities. It's just not true. And I'll just take a look here. I'll take a shot, Terry. Thomas Jefferson High School for Science and Technology, which I helped start years ago. The Democrats locally now want to move that to a lottery. That will destroy the school. Why? Because it's a minority school. It's Asians, but it's not the kind of minorities that fit their picture of what a school should look like. And so taking it away from the testing and the other results, they're trying to move that to a lottery program. I think some of these groups understand that. They want to make it meritorious. And against the basic cultural conservatism of Hispanics has made this a gettable group for Republicans. If you look at the Texas results, Corzine's winning among Hispanics in Texas.
I mean, we win a majority of the Hispanic vote. We win a vast majority of the African-American vote. We do it every year. So, I'll take a majority of the vote. But I think, where it really matters, the Hispanic vote, obviously, is the state of Florida. I think the Biden campaign effectively has gone out to try and label Joe Biden as a socialist and talking about, the primaries and the new Green Deal and other things. And, that's the strategy. It's all part of the campaign and what you have to do. And that's what we have been fighting back against. It's a key thing. I agree with Tom. If we win Florida, it's statistically impossible for Donald Trump to get 270 electoral votes. And it's going to be important on election night. And we've all hear about the vote-in ballot. And the good news about Florida is they start counting absentee 22 days out. So when they release on November 3rd, the evening, by 9 o'clock, we'll know the Florida results. There'll be no real mail we have to worry about in the sense if it's a big turnout. They will have already counted all the absentee ballots. So Florida is the big jewel. If it's over early, I think you're going to see where this election's going to go, and it doesn't matter really what Trump has to say. But we win the majority of the Hispanic vote, and different campaigns, different reasons, and so forth. And I think the primaries probably took a little beating on us, and that's what Joe's trying to get back now.
Let me turn to the upper Midwest and Midwest states now. We've covered Florida, and there's been a lot of analysis lately about the critical importance of the Catholic vote in this election cycle, particularly the white Catholic vote that went heavily for Donald Trump in 2016. This is a topic I've written a great deal about, and what was fascinating to me and rather striking was that since the early 1980s, the Catholic vote and the U.S. national overall popular vote have tracked almost exactly percentage-wise with each other. But in 2016, Hillary Clinton won the national popular vote, but Donald Trump won the overall Catholic vote in the United States. How much attention is the Biden campaign in particular paying to particularly the white Catholic vote that some analysts are saying is absolutely critical?
Yeah, and if you look where Biden is compared to 2016, we are way up. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden is a very strong Irish Catholic. He talks about it literally in every single speech that he gives. Talks about growing up in Scranton, still goes to church every week. He's done it his entire life, talks about the values of family and so forth. So, that's a real sweet spot for Joe Biden in this campaign as a proud Irish Catholic, and something that's not new to him. It's something he's consistently talks about every day. And I think, that's why you've seen, most polls have us anywhere from 8 to 10 up in a state like Michigan. I think that's helping us dramatically. I think it's helping us in Pennsylvania. We've moved literally in the last 8-9 days as the final voters beginning to make their minds. And I think a big piece of that is that Catholic vote, and they trust Joe Biden. And I think for some, listen, for the evangelical community, they like it that Donald Trump has made these very conservative appointments to the Supreme Court. They like that. I think for other Catholics, they don't like the denigrating, running down women and all with tweeting and the things that he's done over the course of the last 3.5 years. I think people found it very offensive. I think they found it offensive last night when Joe Biden was talking about his son, Beau, and who had died, of course, of cancer, who served in the military. And then Trump just went right in on Hunter and talked about him. They just don't like that. It's just not, who we are as Americans. We're better than that.
Did you want to address that question?
I will. I mean, I'm married to a professional Catholic. I mean, in fact, when they looked at state Senate ratings, Jean Marie and Chuck Colgan had a 100% Catholic rating, whatever that was. What does that mean? They were pro-life. They were against the death penalty. They were for feeding the poor. There are a lot of different strains of Catholic thought as they move through. I do think how the Democrats handle this court nominee is important in terms of the rhetoric that they use. If they do the Dianne Feinstein thing and go over the top on this, that could have a negative effect. But Catholics aren't monolithic. The more religious Catholics who, go daily and every Sunday tend to be more conservative than those who, as Jean Marie would say, are Easter and Christmas Catholics. But they're not monolithic. They're from different groups. But if any type of anti-Catholicism, I think, emerges in this court appointment, I think it is hurtful for Democrats, and they need to be able to control some of their elements as they go after the nominee on the pro-life issue.
Is that a tripwire, Terry, for the Democrats with the Supreme Court nominee?
I talked about this on TV a lot. Listen, there was no question in my mind that Donald Trump was going to make the appointment. There was no question in my mind that Mitch McConnell was going to push this thing through. There's very little that the Democrats can do to stop the appointment. I mean, there's very little, as Tom knows better than anybody. He was in Congress forever. But, so I think how we handle it and how we present ourselves, I think is very, very important going forward. The debate's been a little bit, should the president do it with 33 days to go and 1 million people have already voted and so forth? Many people, that's inside baseball. They were going to do it. Mitch McConnell said he was going to do it. Trump was going to do it. So I'm not surprised.
Tom, did you want to add to that at all?
Well, no, I just think it's how you handle it. I think the Democrats have some good arguments. I think the public feels this is being jammed and that they see some hypocrisy in the way Mitch McConnell, although McConnell was pretty consistent. He said when the presidency's of one party and the Senate's another. Some other members didn't. Some other members, I think, went over the top, and those words are coming back to haunt them, and it doesn't appear to be as I would say, consistent. But I said, if you don't have a high tolerance for hypocrisy, you probably don't belong in politics. But I think it's a potential tripwire. Democrats just need to control their message on this thing, and they know what's going to happen at this point. When if Trump didn't nominate somebody, his base would go crazy. And if Democrats didn't oppose this, their base would go crazy. And I think that speaks to the way that American politics has evolved into more parliamentary behavior. The problem is it's not a parliamentary system, it's a balance of power structure. We've seen less ticket splitting than at any time in history. Coalitions change as they do in parliamentary systems, but we're seeing very little across the board cooperation on issues. Very few backroom deals. Terry, you'd have to fight with the legislature, but you could still have a conversation with them, right?
Yeah.
You knew what they had to do and where the tripwires were, what you could get done. That's not even happening in Washington now. The negotiations on this no COVID package are going completely with Mnuchin and Pelosi. The rest of the leaders are out of it because they don't speak to each other. So I don't blame one party or the other. This has evolved over a number of times, and nobody's wearing a white hat in this. Except you, Governor. Except you.
Thank you, sir. The smart place for us to be on this Supreme Court is the issue of healthcare. It is the #1 issue in the country today. Pre-COVID, it was. Now, obviously, we're in the middle of the COVID pandemic. So a 6-3 court, all your viewers should understand, a week after the election, on November 10th, the United States Supreme Court will be hearing a case that will terminate the ACA, the Affordable Care Act. That is a big issue to people. We in Virginia, 1.3 million Virginians today have pre-existing conditions, and that ought to be the place where the debate is. And because I think that will get our folks out to vote.
Yeah, and I'll just say on that, having read the briefs on this, and that I don't think you have any shot of the pre-existing condition that being struck down. It's a very technical argument, but I mean, the Republicans need to think be careful what you wish for. You might get it at this point. I think it's not what you want front and center going into an election year. People didn't like Obamacare at first because they don't like anything that's disruptive of what they have. But now that Obamacare is here and there, being disruptive of people's health care, I think is a problem if you don't have anything to replace it. And to date, the Republicans haven't seemed to come up with an alternative. They couldn't get it through the Senate. They couldn't agree on what to do, and I think that haunts them a little bit.
And in fairness, as you know, Tom, I mean, Trump from day one said he's going to, replace it with a new plan. We're now 4 years in, and he has never even proposed a plan. And there are 22 million Americans that have health coverage that didn't have it pre-Obamacare. And this is a point that Trump is in real trouble on. He's never presented a plan. He's talked about it now for 5 years, and he never put a plan out.
Well, the Congress, and the caucus can't get together because you have some that don't think it belongs anywhere in government, and others that have different views. So, yeah, if you throw it out, it's a big problem. But I don't think it's a practical as a practical matter, you're jeopardizing that part of the bill, but it's good politics.
Hey, I'm going to invite questions from the audience, and we do have one, but I just want to go back to the debate one more time before we let that go. You know, if we can call it a debate. What was Trump trying to do last night? And I mean this seriously, because I'm wondering, was there a strategy there, or was he just kind of winging it and going on instinct, as people say that he does? Was this just all about ratcheting up the base and assuming that his ability to reach beyond the base at this point is gone, and that his only path right now is to play a narrow path through the Electoral College to 270 by activating and agitating his base as much as possible? Tell me, tell me if that's wrong. It's all I'm trying to think as a rational person why he did what he did last night. That's all I can come up with.
Well, I don't have any inside information on that, but let me give you a view. I think when they go back and look at the Biden debate with Ryan, Biden was constantly interrupting Ryan. I mean, obnoxiously so, I thought, and got away with it at that point and kind of took command. Now, that was a vice presidential debate. That was in 2012. I think as you look at that film, if you will, I think Trump wanted to be on offense doing that, wanted to show that he was commanded, he wasn't going to get pushed around and stay on offense and attack and put Biden on the defensive. I think what they forget is the likability factor, and that Americans like people to play by the rules. And, you know, you get 2 minutes on a side, and you can, once in a while, you can violate that. But when you do it constantly, you kind of lose the upper hand with voters in terms of fairness, and you turn into a bully. Now, I will say this. Biden responded and got into the mud with Biden. And there's an old saying, never get into a mud fight with a pig. And I'm not calling Trump a pig, but I'm just saying that's his venue. Bringing Biden into that does not help Joe Biden either. I think had Joe been able to sit up there and try to play very straight on this and not called him a clown and some other issues, I think it would have helped him a little bit more and elevated him. And he probably could have exploited it a little better than he did. On the other hand, you know, you get angry, and secondly, your base likes to see it. But I'm talking about who you're trying to influence here, independent voters. I think they both lost last night, but if they both lose, that hurts Trump more because he needed the boost.
Terry?
Yeah, there's no question what Trump was trying to do. His whole goal was to go in, rattle Joe Biden, and force him to make mistakes. That was his goal, to constantly get him off guard, to try and get Joe to say things. And Joe didn't take the bait. I mean, he had a couple things, shut up, man, and clown. But I mean, comparatively, what Donald Trump, the president of the United States of America, said last night was so shocking, so over the top. It was a huge win electorally for Biden. Trump looked like a fool last night. And I mean, watch the media today across the country on everything, even on Fox TV. They had his own people saying it was a huge mistake last night. And you just can't do that. And not when you're the president of the United States. I mean, saying Joe had the lowest grades. I mean, it was so childish. It looked like a petulant child. But that was his goal, to get Joe to make mistakes. Joe didn't make mistakes. And what I give Biden credit, on several instances, he looked in the camera and said, this is about you, and about us. This is about you. And he did very effective on COVID, and he did a very effective job. Please go vote. And the other benefit is, you saw, it was the biggest 1 hour fundraising in the history of the Biden campaign last night.
Wow. All right, let me turn to a question from one of the participants, James Suits, who says, speaking both about the candidates and the state of politics generally, do you think either candidate / party is able to recognize that 40% of Americans disagree with their ideology and are capable of incorporating that disagreement in governance?
So let me take first stab at that.
Yeah.
And Mark, we talk about it in the book that I wrote with Martin Frost. What has happened here is the advent of single party districts now, where 80% of these districts are really the only race that matters is the primary. The general election in many of these districts is nothing more than a constitutional formality. And so members hew their time and attention to their primary voters, who tend to be much more ideological, left on the Democratic side, right on the Republican side. this is reinforced by the media models today, which are really not news. These are, if you will, good business models. Whereas again, people don't tune in for information; they tune in for affirmation to get their worldviews validated. And so you have Fox, and I will, we know Fox, conservative bent. MSNBC has a very, very liberal bent. Jerry, I'll leave CNN to you, as you have an affiliation there. But the reality on this is that these are business models that these people write and give their viewership what they want to hear. And then finally, the money in politics has moved away from the parties with McCain-Feingold, and it has moved out to these soft money super PACs on the right and the left, which are enforcement mechanisms in primary for anybody who dares cross the line. So if you cross the line, you risk a primary up there with some super PAC approaching you. Parties who have to only take hard money are limited, and they're not going to defend a member in a safe seat because it stays safe to that party. And so the whole primary process system and single party district system and everything else has evolved. This is where the compromise gets punished and not rewarded. And I found out members like to get reelected. Terry and I both left office. I left undefeated and unindicted. That's the way you want to leave the place. But it's members like winning. And right now, you don't stay a winner if you stray too far out of the party boundaries. Terry governed from the middle in Virginia, and he's going to have a primary next time should he decide to run for governor, right, from the left. Because why? Because he was played a little too nicely with Republicans. It's not something primary voters reward. And so the incentives are such that that's why it's hard to work across party lines, even for good people that want to do it.
Terry?
I tried. And listen, when I got elected governor, I represented everybody, even people in parts of this state that did not vote for me. I mean, you're the governor of the state, and you're in charge of everybody, and you put the politics hopefully aside when you get in office. I fought like a dog with my Republicans in the General Assembly on social issues. I had the most vetoes of any governor in the history of Virginia, 120, and I never lost one. But horrible anti-women, anti-gay, horrible legislation. My point was I was stuck with the biggest deficit in the history of the state, left the biggest surplus 4 years later. I had to build a new economy. And I was able to work with Republicans on economic issues. I had to create jobs. We created 200,000 new jobs. But I certainly couldn't do that if we are anti-women and anti-gay. Who the heck wants to move into your state? So, you've got to look where you're going to pick your fights. I mean, I was a brick wall. I mean, they tried to shut all women's clinics down in Virginia. Every one of them. I stopped that. Because the message that we would send to people. But, ultimately it's up to the president, I think. James, I think it's a very good question that you asked. I've known Joe Biden for 40 years. He is a very good guy. He wants to get along. He wants to get things done. He's a creature of the Senate. He's got best friends that have been Republican senators forever. But I am concerned that, Mitch McConnell is going to be most concerned about getting the Senate back in 2022 and then won't work. And right off the bat, if they're not going to work with Joe on any issues, then we're going to go back into the corners. And that's just plain horrible for America. Tom's heard me say this many, many times. I am just disgusted with the Congress of the United States of America because nothing gets done. When you're a governor, you got to create jobs. I didn't have a filibuster. I had to build roads, clean roads, run education, run healthcare. You've got to work in a bipartisan way to get things done. And Congress has got to be to the point, but until we can get rid of some of these gerrymandered districts where you're guaranteed politicians pick their lines, so you can't lose a general election. The only way you could lose your valuable job is in a primary. So it pushes you to the extremes. And I'll just say, finally, I fought like a dog for Medicaid expansion for 4 years. When I went in, when I got elected, the speaker said, I'll never even give you a vote on it. I don't care what you have to say about it. That's just not how you get things done. And listen, I'm a business guy. I've started 25 companies. I've been an entrepreneur. I started my first business at 14 to pay for college. I have done everything. Huge ups, seen it all. Huge downs, I've seen it all. I've been an entrepreneur. I tried to bring that sort of experience into the job. And I would say to the Republicans, you can hate Obama and Obamacare. I get $2.2 billion back a year. I get 400,000 folks that get health care. I can create 35,000 jobs and save rural hospitals, and it won't cost the state a penny. What is your argument? And I would have many legislators privately come over because I entertained them every night at the mansion. I bought them all great booze, and then they'd leave and vote against me. But they'd say, come up and say, Governor, I'd vote for it tomorrow. I need it in my rural community. Then vote for it. Oh, I can't because I'll lose my Tea Party.
Primary.
And they were not willing to risk a job that pays 17 grand a year to get 400,000 Virginians health care. That's what's wrong with politics.
Yeah. Let me add other thing. I'm supporting the referendum this year that allows bipartisan commissions, and I did when the Republicans controlled everything, because I think you should have nonpartisan drawing of the lines. Terry, I don't know where you are on that. Democrats, kind of depending where they stand on it, I think the governor stood up for it and showed some statesmanship in doing that. But the major reason for these single party districts really isn't gerrymandering. I would put ahead of that what I call residential sorting patterns, that people who they like to live around people like themselves. And secondly, the Voting Rights Act, which when you're packing minorities, you end up bleaching the districts around it. And it's been great for Republicans. It's been great for African Americans, but it hasn't been really good in terms of bringing competitive politics to bear. And so you get these single party constituencies that are driving the process. One other thing is I think if Joe Biden instinctively, it tends to be more bipartisan. He was from Delaware, which was, even as a Democratic state, was a corporate state because of its laws and like an understood business. But he's going to have the same problem Obama had, is you come in and it's not just what Mitch McConnell does, it's what does AOC, what do some of these Democrats say? Why are you working with Republicans? We have the majority, work with us. And they put pressure on their leaders to write these partisan bills. So the pressure is all around. It's not just coming from the other party, it's within his own party. So look, Biden has a record, he's a senator, he's a legislator. Very few of them end up making it to the presidency. So he has that understanding and ability to work with people. But I think the macro pressures make it hard for anybody under these circumstances. Maybe the fact that he wants to be one term, Terry, if that's where if he's willing to settle for that, would give him the flexibility to do that.
And we should not fail to mention social media, which is what's occurred in social media over the past couple of years. That just drives this machine every single day, that we now have these huge culture wars in this country. And this idea that I'm a Democrat and you're a Republican, I'm supposed to hate you, and vice versa. I mean, really? We all have different ideas. And, I work with everybody. I mean, I'm very good friends of Jeb Bush. Talked to him yesterday. John Kasich, very active. I knew all these governors, they were Republicans. It's not like we can't get together, have discussions, and maybe come up with ideas. But, now with this social media, and it drives everybody into corners, and it's not healthy for the country.
So I see we don't have any other questions, so we might be finishing a little early tonight. But there's one topic of interest to me and many of my colleagues, and that is, if Trump loses, where does the Republican Party go? What does the post-Trump Republican Party look like if Trump loses this election?
Well, I think that'll be a battle royal. It's look, the Democrats every 4 years have, particularly if you have a vacancy in the presidency, are fighting over what party they want to become. They had that fight this year. Is it going to be the Bernie Sanders wing, or is it going to be a more Biden wing? And we will have that fight. I will tell you this, in Northern Virginia, the party will be better off and more competitive because Trump kind of sucks all the oxygen out. And culturally, he's just not attuned to where Northern Virginia is going. I think you just need to look at the election returns and talk to any locally elected official or defeated Republican candidate up here to understand that. So there will be a battle royal within the Republican Party about what do we do post-Trump. My own feeling is if he is not reelected, that the party will move in a different direction, which is what they have traditionally done when they've lost elections. They've moved in a different direction. Depending on the size of the defeat, I think would put an exclamation point on that. But I think should Trump lose, the cult following that he tends to bring to the party, you want to try to hold as many of them in as you can, but you can't win ultimately without being semi-competitive in urban areas and certainly competitive in suburban areas. And that's an area where they have been bleeding like crazy over the last 4 years. So I suspect the party goes in a different direction.
And I'd make the argument, Mark, I would just change your premise a little bit.
Sure.
Let me be very clear. He's going to be a problem for the Republican Party for many years to come.
Yeah.
He is not going away. He will have 40%. He will have his base who will be angry. He will have a Murdoch television station within a month. and he is going to be a constant thorn for many years to come for the Republican Party. He's not going away.
Is that a problem for the two-party system in this country?
Mark, let me say right now, given the barriers to entry in campaign finance laws, I think the Republicans' biggest fear is that Trump goes off and starts his own party. And the Democrats' biggest fear is that Bernie Sanders and his people, if they don't get their way with the Biden, go off and start their party. You're unlikely to have a revolt or a third party from the middle, because we like to say liberals and conservatives have passion, moderates have lives. You're just not as likely to organize. So owning the middle is important in winning elections, but your energy base in both parties tends to be right and left.
Okay. We do have a question from the audience, so I'm going to get that in before we, I don't know, do we do closing statements, fellas? Here we go. Here we go. I'm not sure if this was already addressed. Sorry, I came in late, but do you think it's important that the president failed to denounce white supremacy? All right, Terry.
That's what I started with, and I'll end with it. Of course, I mean, I don't care what your political persuasion. How simple is it for the President of the United States to denounce white supremacists? He also did, obviously, with the Proud Boys, embrace them. And, you know, they're out today, they're selling their T-shirts, but it's much deeper than that. I mean, we have divisions in this country. And I lived through it, as I said earlier. I had 1,000 neo-Nazis and white supremacists. They're marching down Charlottesville, screaming at people in front of the synagogue, we're going to burn you, and we're going to burn that synagogue like we did in Auschwitz. And they all start cheering. How did we get to a place in this country where anybody thinks that is acceptable to say at any time, anywhere? And it really takes the president of the United States. He should be the moral leader to set the tone. When Charlottesville happened, as I say, I spent 30 minutes on the phone with him, begging him. And I knew him very well. I'd known him for years. I was chairman of the National Governors Association when he got elected, so I dealt with him on behalf of all governors on immigration and ICE detainers and healthcare. I'd had a long relationship. I said, Mr. President, this is your moment. I said, Bill Clinton at Oklahoma City, Barack Obama had Charleston, had Sandy Hook, George Bush at 9/11. There is a time they look to you. You have to set the tone. These are horrible people. And it was interesting because he said, well, Terry, I agree with you. I said, great, Mr. President. I said, you need to go out right now and make a statement because it's just chaos. He said, I will. I said, I'm going to wait for you. I waited 4.5 hours, and he finally came out and then said there were good people on both sides, and he refused to use the words. And I told him specifically, you have to say white supremacist and neo-Nazi. He refused to use either one of those in it, and it was a real failure. So I went out and gave the speech that the President of the United States should. I told them to get the hell out of Virginia, get out of America. They were cowards. These people were not patriots. And so the president should have last night. It is a layup to do it. And he just can't rise to the occasion. And it's creating racial strife in our country today.
Tom, was there a big lost opportunity last night?
Well, I think I would not have written the way he responded, but I don't view it the same way Terry does. I thought when he talked about good people on both sides, as I look back at his statements, it was about the monuments issue. It wasn't about white supremacists versus others. And I think part of the Democratic Party's mantra over the last decade has been identity politics, where they haven't been able to deliver a lot for the Black community economically. So they continue to play up racial strife and civil rights as the Republicans being against it. Look, I think Trump could have been more articulate about it, but I didn't read the same thing into it that some of the pundits in the media and Terry do into that. But, that's politics, and I think he had an opportunity to be more forthcoming that wouldn't have hurt him at all. And maybe the second debate, he'll do that and take that off the table. Let me bring one other thing up. Terry, I'll let you finish, but bring one other thing up, and that is we are going to have an election night result, and then, as the returns come in the following days, the potential really for Americans to be spooked that somehow there's something wrong with absentee ballots. And this thing, if it is genuinely a close race, this could be a real meltdown, a real test for our democracy. If it's not a close race, I think it will be short-lived. I think the president's had an opportunity there to say, look, I will accept the results of the election. That's a pretty easy thing to say. Terry, if you don't, then don't later on change your mind. But why would you keep everybody in doubt beforehand? I don't understand the strategy behind that as well, but we do have, this is a potential problem. where you have one set of returns on election night, and then in the ensuing weeks, those margins dwindle. And at the same time, you have the discussion out there, there's something wrong and there's cheating on these absentee ballots, and this gives it legs, I think, to many people, and I think it's a potential problem.
Yeah, let me just say, I want to clear up the monument thing with you, Tom, because this is important. He wasn't talking about good people on both sides with the monuments. I had briefed him for 35 minutes, and I had told him on my call that none of these people even knew who Robert E. Lee was. The most vile anti-women, anti-Semitic language I have ever heard, anti-African-American. He knew full well. I'm, as you know, Tom, I am very crystal clear. And he knew exactly what I had told him, and he failed that day. But, and I just say in the voting, this whole issue last night, about the integrity of the voting, this is the greatest democracy in the world. I am so tired of him running down these elections. We do not have evidence of this fraud. It is just Trump in his lunacy. But I think it's having the adverse impact. It's getting people to vote early. It's getting people to vote in person. But, we are a great democracy. People have fought and died. I got a son, a Marine captain in Iraq who's fought. I mean, people have fought and died for this democracy. And I get tired of him running it down and trying to destroy our voting system here in this country. It's just plain wrong.
Well, let me just say, there's nothing wrong with mail-in ballots. The problem becomes when you start harvesting these and people go around collecting these ballots on bounties.
Yeah,
Terry,
we're all
Terry,
agreement on that. We're all in agreement. Now you're sounding like Trump.
Well, but that's true, and it is legal in California, by the way. You can harvest them and
That's not
pay.
the issue we're dealing with. I mean, it's not. He's running down people, trying to disenfranchise, scare them from voting, and he knows he's going to lose. Today, he knows. You talked to his top advisors. So he is trying to come up with a strategy of what he does. He cannot fathom the fact that he is going to be a one-term president like Jimmy Carter and George Herbert Walker Bush. Mentally, he is incapable of dealing with that.
Well,
Let me, in the last couple of minutes, if you don't mind, how about a prediction on the Electoral College? Are you willing to go there?
Well, I can tell you where it would be today. I mean, I think Terry
Yeah.
and I are in agreement today. It's well north of 300 votes for Biden today. But as Mark, if you remember going back 4 years ago when Jerry Conley and I were on the stage,
Yep.
Conley said to Clinton by 300, and I said, there's just enough. These states are just close enough that I'm just not willing to make a definitive call on this thing. And so I would say 5 weeks out, Biden is in a pretty good position. But this has been a year with a lot of changes, a lot of black swans coming out of nowhere that nobody expected. Donald Trump knows how to take an issue and ride it for the most part. And so, it's close enough. This isn't Goldwater. This isn't Mondale. This is close enough that you still has the potential to change at this point.
Colleague Ann Holton just threw a question on here. What about the
Okay.
Senate? What about the Senate?
So I'm going to make my prediction because Tom is scared to do it. So let me make my prediction. I do have a 7 o'clock Zoom and I got to get on for Biden.
Okay.
You got 90 seconds.
325 to 355 Electoral College. We win control of the United States Senate and we pick up 10 to 15 seats in the United States House of Representatives. Mark,
I think
write it down, put it in your pad.
It's
and
here.
Tom and I, and then whoever loses is buying the pizza.
There you
yeah,
go.
well,
Thank you,
I
Governor.
think the Senate's going to go the way of the presidency. I think, again, we're seeing less ticket splitting than we've seen at any time in history. And I think you look at Iowa, you look at North Carolina, you look at these states, the presidential race is going to determine how they show up. And right now that favors the Democrats, but they're close enough that if Trump can bring it back a little bit, Republicans can hold the Senate. But I think right now the odds are Democrats take the Senate. Probably, I'd put the House at plus or minus 6, Terry, just to look at where it is, but we'll see.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. I know Terry's
Thanks.
got to go. He's got 30 seconds to his 7 o'clocker. Thank you, Governor.
Come on, it's a big Biden Zoom time. You might want to get on it.
I got a Hallmark movie tonight. Thanks.
All right, fair enough.
I just want to thank everyone so much for coming tonight. And for more events, get on masonvotes.gmu.edu and you can see the rest of our series.
Right.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Dean Rozelle, for moderating.
Thank you, Melissa. Take care, everybody. Be
Bye-bye.
safe.